Remake is a dirty word. The idea of reimagining a classic movie implies that something can be done to the original to make it more palatable for modern audiences, but often big studios are only using the remake as a chance to get a big name out there that millions will flock to in hope of seeing something that appeals to their sense of curiosity and nostalgia. Problems start arising when money is prioritized over creative vision and the original movie is dumbed down to appeal to some kind of common denominator. I just remembered that I'm supposed to be talking about video games. But all of that still applies to video games, arguably more so. Developers and publishers are only going to tackle remakes of popular games that players have built up an affection for over the years because that is the easiest path to financial and critical success. But it's also the riskiest path because if that remake is terrible, people are gonna know. I worry that corners are cut because of the work that has already been done by the original game. We have seen amazing remakes that capture the essence of the source material while also making small improvements to streamline the experience for modern audiences, but all of that requires thought and time, and the ability to take a step back to see what kind of game the remake needs to be by the end of it. People are often cautious of remakes because there's no guarantee that any of this will happen. Who is going to be in charge of the reimagining of that game that defined your childhood? I hope it's not a crazy person. Nintendo really like remaking their video games. I imagine that they're so keen to update their classics because they're often part of long-running franchises which offer up direct comparisons between newer games and ones that maybe haven't aged as well. Regardless of the reason, once Nintendo got a taste for remaking video games, they've rarely paused for breath since. Like, you'd think that remakes would be reserved for only the best and oldest Nintendo games, but then you've got series like Pokemon and Legend of Zelda where it's just like, yeah, this game has aged pretty well, but remaking it might be fun, so why the hell not? Majora's Mask could use an upgrade. Let's freshen up the visuals, maybe add like a fishing minigame, maybe also change some of the boss fights. But there tends to be a 10-year gap between originals and remakes, since that's usually enough time for the gaming climate to change enough to make it worthwhile. Maybe Super Mario 64 DS needed longer in the oven. I feel like there's a controversial opinion in here somewhere if you're looking hard enough. Let's see if you can find it. As release games go, being able to play Super Mario 64 on the go is as inviting an incentive as any for buying a Nintendo DS. It worked for the N64, probably gonna go the same for this dual-screened monster from the new age of gaming with dogs and this sexy rubbing game. But while the DS came with a touchscreen and a microphone, it also came with a D-pad, which made playing games that were designed around a control stick interesting. I've tried hard to figure out the best way to control Super Mario 64 DS over the years, and I'm still not sure. The game is built around 360 degrees of movement, and I can do 4 of those really well. Everything else is kind of a crapshoot, and for some of the more precise parts of Super Mario 64, it can be kind of agonizing. At least you can use the touchscreen as a makeshift joystick and feel just how unintuitive it is to control Mario with a stylus. It's a nice idea, but you put this on the 3DS instead of the 2DS, and that control stick will cover up a world of problems. Mario games have always had silky smooth controls. I can't let this slide. I really like Super Mario 64 DS for everything except for the dodgy controls. The graphics make Mario look less blocky, they expanded the game so you've got more characters to play as and more areas to explore, and they even threw in a bunch of really fun mini-games as well, but the controls, man! I didn't like Star Fox Zero last year because I couldn't get to grips with the controls. It matters more to me than I am comfortable with. I would love to know what Microsoft were thinking when they bought Rare from Nintendo in 2002. Apparently, one Microsoft executive thought that buying Rare would give them Donkey Kong, but he might have been in a minority. I hope he was in a minority. You'd imagine that with the kind of money that Microsoft had to throw around and with their newfound interest in taking the competition to Nintendo and Sony following the release of the original Xbox a year earlier, it's only natural that they'd go after a developer with a proven track record of critical and commercial success. But then Bungie started making buying an Xbox a worthwhile investment around the same time that Rare were weirdly making a bunch of games for the GBA. They got their act together eventually and got into the habit of making misguided sequels to some of the best games in their library. Rare never did make that Conker's Bad Fur Day sequel. They were busy making something much worse. Conker Live and Reloaded is a really weird game. I mean, clearly Microsoft wanted to use Rare's riskiest video game to appeal to a mature audience, but with an added twist so it could stand apart from the N64 game, and sequels are hard, yo! But here's the thing, Conker's Bad Fur Day works because it's made by Rare, the same company that made Banjo-Kazooie and Donkey Kong 64. It looks like those other games with all the collectibles and lovable characters, but there's a sunflower with boobs, and a boiler with testicles, and there's this one level where you piss on rockmen in a nightclub. Changing the visuals removes the relation with other games of a similar style, leaving Conker Live and Reloaded looking just a little too realistic, maybe. I don't know, but if I was in charge, I probably wouldn't censor all of the swear words. Feels a little redundant if you're taking the bad language out without changing the age certificate of the game. It's a fully functional game, but the charm of the original got off a few stops back. Gotta say though, if you're gonna make a bad remake, filling the soundtrack with fully orchestrated versions of the songs that you know and love, that is quite nice. Does make it even more harrowing when you finally reach the great mighty Pooh and he's getting into his stride and then... And I am going to throw my at you. Sure glad they censored the swearing in a boss fight with a giant pile of shit, otherwise I might have been offended. Typically, developers remake a video game that is either really popular, really successful, or maybe just a bit of both. I don't need to tell you why, I think I did earlier actually, but I've always wondered what would happen if a developer just up and decided to remake a game that no one remembers. Would that actually work and would people buy it, or would everyone just ignore it? I say everyone as if I'm speaking for a large amount of people, but I think I'm just talking for myself here. Definitely when I hear about a new game coming out that's actually a remake of an older game, a bunch of different questions go through my head about, why have I never heard of this? Is it any good? Is it apparently popular enough to warrant a remake? I feel just a little bad that I had no knowledge of Flashback before it was remade a few years ago, partly because it's one of those games where all the animation is done through rotoscoping to give everything a bit more fluidity, kind of like Prince of Persia in Another World, but also because it's the best-selling French game of all time. So yeah, prime remake material, especially with all the tech we've got to play with nowadays. Or you could make it terrible. Here's the thing, the original Flashback got by because its simplicity gave it charm, and seeing your character lumbering around environments drove home a sense of weight and vulnerability that a lot of other games can't match. It works well as a platformer because everything is a little slow and methodical. Not so much as a shooty action game though, since enemies take too many hits and you're not exactly well equipped to deal with them. The Flashback remake was a perfect opportunity to reset this balance, but it came out in 2013 and we need more action, damn it! So now there are more enemies that take too many bullets to kill, a fleshed out story that adds nothing to the overall feel of the game, and a shockingly high saturation of glitches for a game that can be beaten in just a few hours. Flashback necessitates precise movements, so having controls that are far too sloppy for you to feel comfortable with anything you do is absolute suicide. Even more surprising when you realise that a large part of the team who made the original came back for the remake. But it's not so bad, since Vector Cell included the 1992 original in its entirety in the main menu. It's being played on a tiny screen and with no music in the background, but this is a fun video game. Maybe not the best idea to give your remake such a direct comparison. I know where I want to spend my time now, and it's on a very small arcade screen. The definition of a remake tends to fluctuate depending on who you talk to. It's easy with movies because original assets tend to be replaced, but they're often only slightly modified in video games to better suit the kind of remake they're going for. Like, a port isn't a remake, and neither is an HD remaster because usually the game under these improved graphics hasn't been altered by a significant enough amount. Most of the time when you see HD collections, effort hasn't been put into much more than polishing the graphics, and that's usually the best way to go. That way you're combining genuine nostalgia with a graphical facelift to appeal to as many people as possible. Also stands to reason that you shouldn't change anything that doesn't need changing when remaking a game. Unless you start from scratch, but why would you be? The first Resident Evil game has been remade on 2 separate occasions, once in 2002 and again in 2015, and both times it stayed reasonably close to the original. The campiness has been traded out a bit for genuine spooky moments, but the remakes do their job well. Maybe one day someone will do this with Silent Hill, and actually kind of do a good job this time. And now for the curious case of the Silent Hill HD Collection, a selection of games that should have only been classified as HD remasters that mysteriously slipped into the world of remakes. Konami certainly didn't have any intention to remake Silent Hill 2 and 3, but the story goes that they lost the source code for both games and had to bring in Hijinks Studio to piece together what they did have to make high-definition ports of these 2 games. In making the Silent Hill HD Collection, Hijinks Studios literally remade Silent Hill 2 and 3, but for the PS3 and Xbox 360. Which sounds like a fun, challenging technical exercise, but then the artistic changes happened, where we start crossing over from a remaster to let's fix mistakes that no one acknowledges are bad mistakes, I think. You know that fog in Silent Hill 2? I think everyone would have a better time if it was thin and wispy rather than thick and oppressive like in the original. Not being able to see details in the background started playing tricks on your mind and helped with the feel of unease that dominates Silent Hill 2, as does the stilted, kind of awkward voice acting. Supposedly, some contractual disagreements with the original cast meant that they wouldn't re-record their lines for Silent Hill 2 or 3. So instead, Konami recast every voice role in both games and subsequently butchered line deliveries all throughout both games. You're changing James Sunderland from a nervous wreck to every Troy Baker performance, and I'm not sure I liked that.
Anyway, I'm glad you're alive.
Anyway, I'm glad you're alive.
At least you get the option of the original voice actors in Silent Hill 2 HD, but unfortunately, you have to make do with the recasts in Silent Hill 3. Also, the fog is blue now. Might as well be dry ice for all I care. I had one game that I wanted to talk about in this video before I made it, but then I looked a little closer at what the game was and realised that it was basically a port instead of a remake. Sega and Sonic Team decided to celebrate the 15th anniversary of Sonic the Hedgehog with 2 video games made for that very purpose, both a celebration of the past and a hopeful look to the future. A great idea in theory, but in practice, those 2 games are Sonic the Hedgehog Genesis and Sonic the Hedgehog 2006. One of the worst ports of all time and one of the worst games of all time. We all know why Sonic 06 is a travesty, but Sonic Genesis is a fascinating concept. Re-release the original Sonic the Hedgehog game on the GBA. How hard would you have to try to screw that up? Well, you could start by remaking the game rather than simply porting it across. We're getting back into the Silent Hill HD definition of remake, where a game's code has to be altered out of necessity instead of wanting to actively change something about the game. Sega weren't as stupid as Konami, so they didn't lose Sonic 1's source code, but they soon realised that the engine that AMA had developed for the 1991 original couldn't be transferred over to the GBA. Instead, Sonic 1 was squeezed and heavily modified to run on Sonic Advance's engine, which goes some way towards explaining the frame rate issues and the numerous glitches and the horribly remixed music and almost every other problem in this game. Let's be honest, neither Sega or Sonic Team were operating at their best in the years leading up to 2006, but no one can screw up a port this badly. This kind of madness could only happen by making the wrong modifications in the wrong places. The PC port of Batman Arkham Knight is looking on like, what the fuck? But even then, it's worth noting that the much more powerful Nintendo DS came out a full 2 years before Sonic Genesis ended up on the Game Boy Advance. And if it was a lack of blast processing that was holding back a straight port from the Sega Genesis, why not release it on a console that is much more powerful than an N64? That way, you wouldn't have to run around in fear of slamming into enemies because the camera is zoomed in way too close, or be shown up by a ROM hack that successfully ports Sonic 1 onto the GBA. Still, I think this is the only way to see a Sega Genesis logo on a Game Boy Advance game. What timeline are we in? Is this the bad future we were warned about? This is RabbidLuigi, and I can't understate just how terrible Sonic Genesis is. Everything from the way it runs, to the screeching chiptune music and sound effects in your ear, everything is an insult to the original, but I would still recommend playing it. It is genuinely shocking seeing how badly you can remake the core features of a game that got so much right before. This is Sonic Team remaking classic Sonic, and all I can think is that you guys would have been fucked without Sonic Mania. Have you got an idea that you'd like me to turn into a countdown? Let me know in a comment down below, and make sure you check out my Twitter, where I'll be turning the best submissions into a poll where you can then decide the best topic. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.